Welcome again to Martin Kauble's living room and piano salon. And with me again is Abriana Church, pianist and longtime friend. Welcome again. Here we go. So this performance covers a wide range of musical styles, musical periods, and we're going to begin with the Baroque period. Johann Sebastian Bach, his Prelude and Fugue in
A-flat major.
Yes. Bach wrote 24 preludes and fugues in each of the major and minor keys around the circle of fifths. And then he published that in one book, but then he went on and composed a second set as if that weren't enough. So he wrote another set of preludes and fugues. When we talk about a prelude, we're talking about a piece that comes before something or precedes. Then it sets the mood for the particular movement that comes next. They were paired up with something called a fugue. And a fugue is sort of like, I guess if you were to think of a choir, you would have a voice and then another voice that takes a primary theme, right? And then alters it. And then there are different motives and portions of it that come with like little hints here and there. It's called counterpoint. It's interesting to note that with this, although the music seems very sparse, when you look at it, it's unbelievably complex. Yeah. There's so much going on. My question to you is, why did you pick this one?
Yeah, there's 24 to choose from, so that's a good question. I've actually played the Prelude and Fugue in F major from Book 2, and I just loved the warmth of that sound, and that was something else that I really found attractive in the A-flat major Prelude and Fugue. So it opens up with this really beautiful prelude, and it really is peaceful, and a lot of my pieces have a ton of things going on, which is really interesting to listen to. This piece is no less complex, but it gives you this kind of sense of meditation and peace. So it's in a different style than some of my other program works tonight.
Very pastoral.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very warm.
So that sets the mood. And then we have the fugue in the same key. Do you want us to hear just how the main theme opens? And then I guess the trick is it's kind of fun because the listener gets to hear how the main theme sort of hands off the baton to another runner, right? And then, and then the recognizable theme comes back.
Yeah, I know, it's really fascinating. Just what a genius and gift Bach had for writing counterpoint, where, you hear this first subject, that's what it would be called.
The subject, correct.
Mm-hmm. And then you hear it coming back in the answer. And then it comes back again. And it just keeps coming in all of the voices. And after you hear the subject in each voice, then it goes into the exposition and just goes through different keys, and it's really fun. But throughout the whole thing and all these little episodes, you're just hearing that subject come back again and again, so you can really listen for that.
You take the listener on an odyssey, so to speak, a little journey, and here's our little character, and here our character appears here, and character appears here. Mm-hmm. Now, about the key this is written in, A-flat major. Something about the different keys, the key signatures, and I guess a person can say moods or colors they assign to. Help us understand a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in the Baroque era, there was something known as the doctrine of affections in music, and each key was associated with a specific mood. So D major, it was the key of victory. And, A flat major is a key that's associated kind of with this gentleness and warmth. And also it could be just a pompous.
It sounds happy to me, not pompous, but I don't know.
I know. It's really interesting that I feel like the prelude and the fugue, they're complementary, but they also do have kind of a different moods to them, and some performers will make the fugue more just gentle, and they'll play it.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I hear it more of the up tempo. That's
yes.
what I think. They have like a humorous Bach in a way.
Yeah, and that's how I just personally tend to interpret it, especially after the first prelude is pretty extended compared to, if you look at all of the preludes and fugues, it's among the longer preludes. So I feel like after you just have been meditating through this so long, you're just then ready to, get up and just...
I know how that feels. You can't hold me down very long.
Yeah.
All right. So, Bach's Prelude and Fugue in A flat major from the Well-Tempered Clavier, Book 2.
Here we go.
Here we go. Next on the program, Robert Schumann's Piano Sonata Number 3 in F minor, Opus 14. I have a long list of things here because there's so much about this piece, and to be honest, I was not familiar with this piece until Aubrey presented this. Composed in 1836, revised in 1853, and that is important. Now, this was written during Robert's, his darkest period, so to speak. He suffered a lot with depression and whatnot, and there was this sort of thing. The composer and pianist Ignaz Moscheles or Moscheles, it just depends on who you're talking to, writes, the gravity and passion permeating the work are very much in contradiction with what a concert audience of our time expects. Now, this is interesting to me because Robert Schumann, his pieces to me, he's often regarded as a miniaturist, the Merry Farmer and Dreaming and, smaller pieces. But this is altogether different. This is on a grand scale. Yeah. Grand scale. Yes?
Yeah, it's even called Grand Sonata.
Yeah.
That was the suggestion that the person who was dedicated to, I'm not going to attempt the name.
Moscheles. Yeah.
Yeah, he suggested Grand Sonata.
Grand Sonata. It was originally titled Concerto for piano without orchestra. Concerto being a piece of music written for a solo instrument, the piano, and a full orchestra behind. Yeah. And so then we need to get into this little bit of a soap opera because Robert Schumann, he was studying law, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And Robert Schumann then came under the tutelage with piano music and piano lessons, a renowned, prominent piano teacher, Friedrich Wieck. Now, Friedrich had a daughter named Clara, and Robert fell in love with Clara, correct? But Friedrich her father said, "You're not going to be hooked up with some penniless composer or so to speak, right?" But their affections for each other grew over time. And it was interesting because Robert and Clara, I think they had a special little, kind of a code, messages that were hidden in the music, correct?
Yeah, their relationship was really centered around music, and that was a big part of their communication. I mean, Robert actually lived for a time with Clara and her father.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, as he's staying with him, and I think along with a couple other pupils. He was several years older than Clara, and so at first it was just a friendship. But, they were always really good friends, and they really bonded over the music that they were playing and studying, and, it's...
It's kind of touching.
Yeah,
it's almost cute.
Just almost,
Well, you thought soap operas Days of Our Lives, but, hey.
What do they say? Truth is stranger than fiction? Maybe, the love story here is better than the Hallmark movies. So, in this case...
I like that. Can I quote that?
You have liberty to quote that, yes. So, yeah, eventually they did grow to really love one another, and as you said, Clara's father did not like it at all.
He was very domineering from what I've read, and this whole thing about the no sent Robert into a very dark depression, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Robert already suffered from depression and an unstable mind. We don't really know exactly what that issue was. People have suggested maybe he was bipolar, but...
There were demons, though, sure. I mean, Sergei Rachmaninoff, another one. There was a composer who, my gosh, if ever there was somebody who, went through the darkest, deepest depressions, but yet his music, just the gut-wrenching... The soul of it all in there bleeds into it, and it's really, to me, it's miraculous how these types of things, when it goes into the music and permeates like that, it becomes I don't know what the word is. It's almost visceral, and yeah. There are 4 movements in this.
There are.
So what about this? Clara is represented in this by part of that code. It's a 5-note descending scale. Mm-hmm. And could you maybe help us to see to hear what that is?
Yeah, and you can actually see it if you visualize, because Clara is 5 letters, and so actually it's a little bit different in the German alphabet.
What's
letters,
German?
You wouldn't know.
Ich kann's das nicht verstehen. Yeah.
See? And actually the notes on the piano would be corresponding with those German letters. So
all right.
The theme that spells Clara sounds like this. And that comes through the other movements too.
Yeah, it permeates the whole thing.
Yeah, like the second movement.
Right on.
Mm-hmm. So yeah.
That is so cool.
It's amazing. Yeah, he really loved literature, and for a while he was debating between writing and music. So he kind of found a way to do both by just encoding these messages within his music, and it wasn't only the Clara theme, there were other themes too. And then he also wrote a music journal, so he, put his writing skills to use.
There you go. That was the New Music Review, das Neues Musikzeitung, if I remember, it kind of like that.
Sounds right.
Yeah. And he would champion, there was, during that time, maybe you could almost call it over explosive virtuosic pieces, and then things that were a little more controlled and whatnot. And he would align himself with what was called the Band of David, David's Bundler, and against those that wrote just for showy effects and all that stuff. The Philistines, right. So, what fascinates me, though, about this piece, because it was earlier on, though, this is still it's really virtuosic. It's Hugianic. And I even think to myself, my gosh, the last movement, I think Franz Liszt would probably crawl out of the room and run, because it is just over the top. And to hear it, I think to myself, this is Schumann?
Yeah.
It has hints of Chopin and Liszt. What's interesting also to me is it's almost prophetic, because there are certain passages and harmonies and things in the writing in this that almost points to Sergei Rachmaninoff later on.
Yeah, last night we were listening to one of those the piano sonata, right? The last movement of the first sonata. And yeah, just you can
one of my
hear
favorites.
The similarities. It's amazing.
So the 20th century composer Sergei Prokofiev was startled by the widespread unfamiliarity with this masterpiece. And in fact, in his journal, he wrote, "If I ever have to give recitals, not of my own works, I shall definitely play it." Franz Liszt, then, the famous 19th century composer and pianist, described it as rich and powerful. And there's one more remark here, that this truly lives on as an attestation to his deep, undying love for Clara. Yeah. So how would you describe quickly each of the movements?
I think that the first movement really just opens up the listener's mind to the enormity of this piece, and it really grabs your attention. You're not expecting, you're
we're
gonna hear something by Schumann, and then you hear these thundering octaves, So I think the first movement, it does that really well. It captures that power, and it's also sighing. It's already starting to portray some of what you'll hear in the second movement, some of those just yearnings for Clara, and then that you hear the passion. He starts getting upset again. I think there's probably some anger there. And
she made him mad.
I don't know if it was the gal's fault this time around. Then you hear playfulness even coming through, and he's probably reminiscing about when they were kids growing up together.
She always described him as like a child, his inner child, right?
Yeah, he could be very mischievous sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's really fun to listen to, all those different moods in the first movement. It's kind of just a wide array of Schumann's personality. And the second movement is that really fun scherzo movement.
Humorous, yes.
Yeah, really.
Capricious type. Joking.
Yeah, and it's also kind of in this steady tempo that, it could either kind of be taking the place of what would be a dance in a traditional, either sonata or even maybe one of the suites where you have a dance in the program. It just sounds very up and dance like.
Yeah.
And then there's the third movement, which is definitely the saddest, most melancholic movement, and based off of what we know of the history, we can just imagine, what was going through his mind. And he, was totally separated from
Yeah, they
Clara.
were separated during this
Yeah.
time. I mean, that would be sad.
And, there's more than that. It was also that him and Clara both really respected Frederick, the dad, because he was Robert's piano teacher. He was a mentor, and Robert really looked up to him, and he was like a young adult, so he would look up to him just as a mentor. And Clara, of course, this is her dad, and he really had a lot to do with her development, and as a person, as a pianist. I mean, that he was like everything. She was the oldest child, and
his favorite, and I think he looked at her as, nurturing her also as becoming, this legendary concert pianist, and she was no slouch.
No, no, definitely not. And I know maybe this would be the time to put that in there. We kind of were talking about the fact that Clara was such a virtuosic pianist, and this actually really came in handy later because Robert injured his hands trying to, he was so skilled as a pianist, and his teacher said, you could be the best pianist in Europe, and he just took it too far trying to reach that, and he created this machine to try to gain independence of his fingers, and that just... Wasn't
it weights and pulleys or something and he tendonitis or something.
He screwed up his hands.
Aww.
But, then along comes Clara, and she was the champion of his works. She was an amazing pianist, and...
Inspiration.
Yep.
Now what about that last movement?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
The last movement is a force to be reckoned with. I think it's very adventurous, and
it's an odyssey.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't know, maybe he's kind of, just dreaming about, just galloping his horse and, sweeping Clara away or something. It's just, very daring.
I hadn't thought of that, but it is. It's very... right. It's very, I guess you could say it's an explosive, I don't even know how to describe.
It's cavalier.
Yeah.
It's...
like the champion and all this stuff.
There's like a lot of just courage and,
I hadn't thought of that.
There.
Oh, I love the last, oh my gosh, about the last 45 seconds or so.
Yeah.
Oh my. All right. So, Schumann, Piano Sonata number 3 in F minor. Here we go.
Oh, I'm so excited for the next piece because it was written by a friend of mine, Robert Rust. Robert and I met at school at the Masters University. He's graduated as a composition major as of last year, and he's going to tell you a little bit about this piece.
Hello, my name is Robert Rust, and I'm a composer from Eugene, Oregon. I started composing when I was in high school. Before that, I was more interested in math and science, but I eventually realized that those things just wouldn't make me happy for the rest of my life. And so I turned to the only other thing that I really enjoyed, which was music. The inspiration for Blackbirds came from a poem by Wallace Stevens called 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. And this poem comes from the Cubist movement in literature, which was really concerned with presenting multiple perspectives all at the same time. And the only way that I could really think to convey this idea was to use a technique called polytonality, which is essentially just presenting multiple musical keys all at the same time. When writing for the piano, I often turn to one of my favorite composers, Maurice Ravel, and I've always really appreciated his piano writing. It's very lush and smooth, and I just love the soundscapes that he creates with the instrument. And in order to pay homage to that composer, I actually quoted a number of his pieces throughout Blackbirds. If I were to suggest a visual aid for this piece, I would recommend a set of paintings by Pablo Picasso called The Violin. These also come from the Cubist movement in art and are really concerned with looking at, in these paintings, a violin from multiple perspectives all at the same time. I hope you all enjoy this piece and walk away from it feeling refreshed and encouraged. Thank you very much.
This was very interesting to me. Listening to this piece, I heard so many different styles come out. Ravel, Debussy, even some Rachmaninoff perhaps in there too. I guess there are certain, to say the word again, about the different colors and whatnot. So how does this piece strike you? And I guess I'm also wondering, it's not often that somebody champions a piece by someone else. Now, look, I mean, this is, of course, a friend of yours, but there's something about it. And I have to tell you that I wasn't really sure, well, what's this going to be about? But I trusted you, of course. And I was impressed by what I was hearing here. So would you describe this as a piece that's impressionistic? Would you describe it as 20th century or modern? Well, this is 21st century, but, modern period. What would you, go ahead.
I mean, I wouldn't even hesitate to call it 21st century just because I haven't heard anything exactly in this same style. It's very authentic, even though it uses, just hints of Ravel and some other composers. It is very much its own piece. And that's what I appreciate most about it because, I didn't know what to expect when Robert asked me to play it. And I was really impressed when I heard it with that originality. Yeah.
There's a pianist. He was the head of the piano department at Seattle Pacific University, Dr. Wayne Johnson. And he would debut pieces by Hovhannes. And there were a number of recordings that he made with these pieces. And they were friends. They knew each other. Do you think that if this friend of yours were to compose something else, would you do it again?
If it is as masterful as Blackbird's, I would do it in a heartbeat.
Well, let's hope that happens. So, the next pieces, set of three, by Igor Stravinsky. Three movements from, it was a ballet, Petrushka. And this was transcribed then for piano in 1921. Now, this is definitely 20th century music is what it was called, the modern period. I remember first hearing the pieces by Stravinsky when I was in college, and I thought, what the heck is this? What? And it's really interesting. In fact, the London Times, there was an opening review, and this piece at its premiere proved successful with the audience, but in the article it said, although the house seemed a little puzzled by the newness of it all. So this is very special music. In fact, it can be percussive, and that makes sense. The piano is a percussion instrument. But it is different, but yet it still remains tonal in so many ways. A lot of the modern music, it becomes somewhat experimental. I'm not always certain if the ends justify the means, because if I don't understand what's going on, I can kind of sit there, and go, well, but this is, it's full of imagery in my head. Stravinsky included Russian folk songs, right, in the melodic material. Okay, ranging from those sung at Eastertide and those belonging to Midsummer Night. Now, I'm not familiar with that. Are you? Or do you have any idea about that? You could teach me, but...
Yeah, I'm not very well versed on all the Russian fairs.
So we're equal.
We're about equal. Although I do know that a lot of these were mixes of just the Christian religion with other pagan...
That's right.
Russian old pagan rituals. So it's kind of a syncretism of religions, unfortunately. But
That's life.
yes, that's very common. That's very common, and you have to fight that within Christianity. There's so much color, though, because, it was written as ballet music. This was before Stravinsky wrote Rite of Spring, which, if you're into music history at all, you know, that was quite the event. People were really upset with his music, and people were, that was the throwing fruit moment. Some people loved it, some hated it.
Right.
This was just a little bit before
Throwing fruit. I love it. Right. Thwack.
Whack.
Right.
But this was just a little bit, it was kind of going that direction, but as you said, it was still tonal enough that the audiences were really enjoying it, and they liked that it was kind of new, but, it was still relatable enough.
It takes a little bit. You have to, when you hear it for the first time, it's, huh? But then when you when you pay attention the second or third time around, it's like, well, this is making good sense.
Yeah, and especially as you understand that the piano is a transcription of the orchestral version. So all these, different sounds, you can imagine the different instruments that were originally creating those sounds.
That's what makes the piano the best instrument in the world, right? So
orchestra at your fingertips.
Right, it is. Polyrhythms, mixed rhythms, difficult technical obstacles. I mean, this is a bit of a monster, also, and it became a favorite competition piece. Yeah. So here's a question for you. There are 3 movements to this. Could you tell us just a little bit about each of the 3?
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
Actually, I'd love to take you through the plot narrative that would go along with these movements.
I love story time.
Okay, story time, here we go. The first movement, it opens up to this scene. It's in the fair, and we're in St. Petersburg. You can imagine just all the different vendors and all the fairgoers. You've got your peasants, you've got gypsies, you've got merchants, and all of a sudden, there's this magician that emerges from the crowd, and everybody kind of starts gathering around because they're excited to see what sort of show he's going to put on.
I love him. I love magicians.
He pulls out a magic flute from his cloak, and he starts playing it, and it's this just really wispy Russian song. And then 3 puppets start emerging from his little theater.
Okay.
And he taps them with the flute, and they come to life, and they start dancing.
Oh my.
And that is what the first movement is. It's the Russian puppet dance. And then after the dance...
How does it open?
Okay.
I got it.
Just like that.
I can do that.
All right, your turn. No.
I ain't saying a word. No, go ahead.
So, that's all cheerful and happy and everything.
Yeah,
And,
I love it.
Then, though, the dance ends, and all of a sudden, you have just these...
Oh! I mean, it's like...
Whoa.
Yeah.
What's going on
It's
here?
shocking.
So Petrushka is the main puppet character.
All right.
That we're following. There's also a ballerina puppet. And
Of course.
Of course. And then a rival puppet, the Moor.
Of course.
Of course.
Why does this always happen? Okay.
So Petrushka gets kicked into his room after the dance by the magician. And the next movement is Petrushka in his room. And this poor little puppet, he doesn't have any life outside of doing the magician's, wishes and dancing for the audience. So he's scrambling around in his room, trying to get out, just exasperated that he has to be jailed up, and he's also just, really upset that he's such a pitiful looking fellow. He has this big nose, and he's like, oh,
Always the nose.
Always the nose. And then he starts trying to console himself by thinking about the ballerina doll. And he's kind of dreaming about the ballerina doll, and she comes to visit him, and he thinks that, maybe she's warming up to him. And so he starts, expressing his love more fervently, and then she gets scared and she takes off. And so then, after that, he's upset again, and it just ends, him trying to clamber out, and then all he succeeds in doing is kind of tearing a hole through the wall and kind of getting stuck in it.
Okay.
And so you hear him kind of swinging back and forth in the wall.
Right, I didn't know this. Right.
And he's just hanging like this.
I know that feeling.
And then that movement ends, and in the ballet version, there's more narrative that the piano version does not have music for, but the little bit of that is the ballerina runs out of Petrushka's room and goes to visit the other doll, the Moor, and he's this egotistical bimbo, and he's just laying back on his couch, and playing with, a rock, and yep, that's his expression, pretty much. So she thinks, though, he seems pretty cool, and so she starts trying to get his attention, and then they dance, and Petrushka comes into the room, Petrushka is, upset and jealous. So then the Moor chases Petrushka out of his room, and then the ballet cuts off and we go into the fair scene. So we started with the fair, and then we went into the puppets room and saw kind of that inner life of the puppets, and now we open back up to the fair, and that is now going back into what you hear on the piano as the third movement. So we're back in the fair, and, it just shows all these people dancing, a wide assortment. You have gypsies dancing with merchants, then you have a peasant come with a bear, a dancing bear.
A dancing bear?
A dancing trained bear. At first everybody's, freaked out, and then he starts...
Sounds like a little too much vodka to me.
Probably at a Russian fair, you're not very far off there. So,
okay.
Yeah.
It's great. I remember hearing this the first time and only time, my freshman year at college, PLU. And we had a gathering over at my piano professor's house, Calvin Knapp, Papa Cal. And there was a fellow there named Tim Drews. And he was just this really just... he looked like a mad scientist, is what he really looked like. He looked like a mad scientist to me. And he was talking about, I thought, what is this? And then he played it. I was like, what the heck's going on here? I'd never heard stuff like that. But, now I think he actually played better.
I won't tell him you said that.
I know. But I will tell you, though, this is incredible stuff, and it just brings everything to life. I can see the whole thing as I'm listening to it.
Yeah, well, thanks. And so Petrushka, there's the fair scene, and that goes on for a while. And then the dancers, it's kind of getting evening, and there's an unsettling air coming in. There's some weird people that come into the dance, people with masks, and devils come to dance, with everyone. So it's getting a little out of hand, and then the crowd suddenly kind of stops swirling around because they hear these little cries coming from the theater. And they look up, and the Moor is chasing Petrushka with his saber, and he runs around. The ballerina's trying to stop him, and finally he catches up with him and he slashes him down. And the crowd is like gasping, they just witnessed a murder. And suddenly the magician comes along and he's, what are y'all staring at? They just called a policeman and they're all in an uproar, look what just happened with your puppets, and what are you going to do about this? And he's like, oh, no. He's like, calm down. And he picks up Petrushka and he's just limp and he's like, he's only a doll. What are you guys doing? He's only a doll. How can a doll be murdered? And he just shakes his head and starts walking away with him. And the crowd kind of is confused, like, oh, yeah, he's a doll. And they just kind of disperse, but they're confused, what just happened. Maybe the magician just put a spell over them, but they're confused, and they just kind of go away. And the magician, he's carrying the limp Petrushka back to the theater. And then suddenly he realizes, that feeling he's being watched. And he looks up at the top of the theater, and Petrushka is there, the ghost of Petrushka, staring down and scowling at him.
Oh, I didn't know this.
The magician hurriedly runs away, and that's the end of the ballet. He's there to haunt him for the rest of his life, apparently.
Wow. I like story time.
Yep. So there you have it.
Well, there we go. Stravinsky's Petrushka, 3 movements. All right. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Our final piece on the program, very famous piece, and it will be immediately recognizable. Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring. Johann Sebastian Bach wrote in addition to his keyboard works, these were vocal compositions, a cantata. And literally the word cantata comes from the Italian cantare, meaning to sing. And it was always liturgical. It had to do with, this was sacred music, and these were performed in the, well, I guess you would say the churches or the cathedrals and whatnot. But there would be several movements, and it would involve, of course, a choir and soloists. But this one, it's very famous. It was transcribed for the piano by the great pianist Myra Hess. Myra Hess, quite a phenomenal lady, but this one, people will recognize it because this is a darling when it comes to weddings. You hear it as a recessional, a processional, and it's one of the most beautiful pieces ever written. But about Myra Hess, this is great. I was doing a little research about her, and she began piano lessons at the age of 5. She was a fabulous concert pianist. And it's interesting, her debut came in 1907. Interesting. And she went on to tour through Britain, the Netherlands, and France. Now, here we go. In 1922, her American debut, she became a prime soloist and ensemble player. Now, this is interesting right here. Hess garnered greater fame during the Second World War when, with all concert halls blacked out at night because of the war to avoid being targeted by German bombers. Oh yeah, she organized almost 2,000 lunchtime concerts. Well, we've also heard of these. There was a couple series I've seen called Brown Bag concerts, which have been kind of spin-offs from this type of thing. Right. But this started during the Blitzkrieg. Yeah.
I had no idea.
Right.
That's
Yeah. So the concerts were held at the National Gallery in Trafalgar Square. She began her lunchtime concerts a few weeks after the start of the war, were presented on Monday to Friday for 6.5 years without fail. 6.5 years. This is what she did.
That's amazing.
Power of music. Okay, so here we go. If London was being bombed, the concert was moved to a smaller, safer room. Promising young performers were given the opportunity then to appear in the concerts alongside established musicians, initially for no fee, but after a while, all the performers received a standard expense fee of 5 guineas. I don't think it's 5 guinea pigs, but 5 guineas, no matter who they were, with the exception of Hess herself, who never took a fee for her appearances. Nothing. Right. And that's something. In all, then, Hess presented 1,698 concerts seen by 824,152 people who took count, right?
Yeah,
and she
right.
personally played in 150 of them. This is great. For her contributions, maintaining the morale of the populace, right? Of London, King George VI created for her a Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 1941.
I saw that prefix before her name, but I didn't know how she had garnered it.
Dame Hess. So she eventually arranged this beautiful chorale, Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring. Her arrangement was published under this title, which is a rough translation of the name of this hymn, which is Jesus Remains My Joy.
And wow, knowing the history of just how this piece was used, you can imagine everything that was going on in the war, and then people hearing,
Yeah.
Jesus is my joy.
The power of music.
Yeah. And I Yes.
Okay, here are the words. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this was translated from German, and I just love meditating on the words when I practice this piece. It's been just such a blessing to me. Jesus, all my joy remaineth, my heart's solace and my heart's stay. All my wounds to heal he deigneth, on him all my need I lay. He my heart's fond hope and treasure, my soul's rapture and dearest pleasure. He is with me day and night, ever in my heart and sight. And the second verse, Jesu, joy of man's desiring, holy wisdom, love most bright, drawn by thee, our souls aspiring, soar to uncreated light. Word of God, our flesh that fashioned, with the fire of life impassioned, striving still to truth unknown, soaring, dying round thy throne. Beautiful.
Beautiful. All right, easy joy of man's desiring, and still pertinent to this very day. Muchly so.
Muchly so. Well, glory to Christ.
Okay. Now, easy joy man's desiring.